reduced word count to what my proclivities, that's a weird word to use in that sentence, compared to what my general predilections, that's even worse. Hello everyone, welcome. Whimsy and Metaphor Write-Along Club. This is episode 3 and we are starting what I have dubbed the world building process. I want to go a little bit into detail before we start getting into that list that I made last episode. And I think what's actually going to happen now that I've had a chance to sit back and process and think about where this is going, I wanted to actually get most of that work done on the stream, because I think that's a much more, I think that environment is a lot more conducive. I think all of the chopping and changing that I need to do here with cuts and things, it's just easier to do it on a stream. This episode is the episode where I get to talk to you a little bit about process. I want to have a little bit of creative direction on this project before I get into the stage where I've got to do it all live with people throwing ideas at me. That's just a personal thing. What I want now, and what I was aiming for last time, was to start to get the vibe. I've started to get the main concepts that I'm working with. I've started to get a handle on the main themes of where I'm going. All I'm doing now is really building up that sense of where the story is headed to, and I can start putting together a timeline. Last time we got all of the tone sorted out, that we're starting to get to more detail, and I cut myself off at one point when we were talking about, I believe it was the relationships between the characters or something like that. I cut myself off and I said, now we're starting to get into too much detail. No, it was about where the dead people came from. We were starting to talk about what is death. And that was getting into more detail than I wanted to go into for the list episode. Now we're going to start to pull apart some of that detail. So last time we talked a little bit about getting into the world building, and I was sort of talking about how my process and the things that I find necessary in world building aren't necessarily what people think of when they think world building. People often think of that very Tolkien-esque, having the whole world, all of its history, all of the important characters, kind of all laid out in advance. That's not what we're working on here. And I wanted to have a talk specifically because I'd been having a chat in the last week or so on a writers group that I'm in about characters and how we go about writing characters. Unfortunately, the best way that I can describe that feeling is that the character becomes like a nebula. Big colours, lots of gases. Let's not move my hands around too much. That does weird things to my face. Lots of bits of dust in space, and chemicals, and minerals, and whatever else, all coalescing into these big clouds of colour that you can see from a huge distance, and they make shapes that look like smoke figures and things. They're very, very cool. Because when a character is ready to be written in my head, they don't look or feel like a human. They look or feel like a big collection of tiny traits and details, much like people in real life, a great big collection of traits and details and history and motivation and experience and trauma and all those sorts of things, that if you look at them up real close, it's just a bunch of dust and gases. But if you step back enough, they look like a pretty picture. I am now at the point, having done the lists that we did last time, where I feel like I have the nebulae for these characters. They each have a a personality in my head now. We're done that. We've got that stage. The story has a nebula in my head. I've started to get enough of an idea of the themes, the ideas, vaguely where I'm going. But I still feel like the plot itself has not reached that stage. The plot itself is still just kind of some dust on the kitchen floor. I need to get that plot now to the same nebulous stage that the characters and the themes and the world are in. What's the additional information that I need? There are two criteria that I'm coming to with this. One of them is about giving myself a better handle on things. And part of the world building process then is me picking the questions that will allow me to dig progressively towards that plot from these side angles until I can start seeing what the shape of it is. The second thing that I think is important for this is that way back in the first episode, even when I was talking about ideas, I was talking about how I fully believe that one of the ways to make more original, quote unquote, not that that exists, but make more original feeling stories is by taking several ideas and fitting them together, rather than taking a single idea and deepening it, or taking a single idea and building out from it. These details at the moment are not like that. They are built out from a central concept. And that's fine because of where we're at, right? If I just were to start writing this first draft now, it would be fine, but I would feel like a lot of the concepts in it were simplistic. I haven't given some of these details enough space and enough time to grow into something that is that feels a little bit less like the idea that is coming to my head right now is sort of like a park or a garden where you've got stuff growing wild a little bit, right? It's not all laid out nicely. It's not all in its little sections. It's kind of things that have seeded from birds, from compost, from whatever, growing on top of one another and around each other. And you get this sense that it is a very unique situation because those plants have grown in a certain way. They have taken root and sprung up, and they've affected each other, and they've intertwined, and that is what is creating this area. I think getting these details that I'm about to talk about to the point where I feel like I can write about them confidently is not so much about necessarily having, or it's not only about having those details worked out so that I know what they are and I know what I'm doing. It's partially about letting those ideas play off each other and seeing how they interact so that I can really start pulling together some of those more interesting, organic, creative ideas. And again, if I were doing this just as one of my own projects, if this were a longer piece, this stage where things are just bouncing off each other in my head might take years. You know, they'll take a very, very long time to kind of get to that stage. But we're on a time crunch. We're brute forcing this, and I've got to get this to the point where I have that feeling without needing to necessarily spend a lot of time just letting ideas pass through that section of my brain. So, that said, let's switch up where we're looking at there we go, and start getting into this. So let's have a look at these list of questions that needed to be answered. Looking at these questions that we've got here, I'm starting to notice a little bit of a pattern, as one does. I'm going to group these into two sections because we've kind of got, one group of questions which is about the politics and political situation. And they've got these two questions over here, which are about logistics of dying. I've got all of these questions here. I may not answer them all directly. At least I won't go through them one by one. I won't be treating this like a checklist. I will get to a point where, when I start outlining, if you were to read through this list and ask me the questions one by one, I would be able to answer them. But I won't necessarily do that by going through one by one and answering them. I'm going to do a lot of thinking around the questions rather than thinking through the questions. We'll see that in a minute. Now, I actually think that these are the only two categories of questions that I need to answer in order to start getting to the outline. I think once I've got these sorted out, that's actually all I need, because that is the basis of the story. I want to demonstrate a little bit of what this process is going to look like before I start to get to the streaming side of things. And under this heading, I'm going to start making a couple of little notes about this sort of conglomerate of questions that I had last time, because all of them are sort of revolving around this. That's the wrong color. Interrelationships between these groups, their ideals and that sort of thing, and their conflicts. I also note that a lot of them are revolving around the different ideologies and how they relate to the different politics. So I need to make a little note that this is intertwined with, why did I put that line there? Logistics of dying. I'm also going to make a note to myself, and the reason why I'm making notes to self here, this is not something I'd usually do. This is a very sort of internal process. I'm making notes so that I have a physical record of what my thought process was that I can reference later and that you guys can reference later. And also so that I'm kind of forcing myself to make these thought processes explicit. I'm forcing myself to actually explain what I'm thinking, why I'm thinking it, rather than just thinking it and continuing about my day. This is a way to make this series actually useful to people that live outside my head. So let me reframe some of those questions then. And this becomes now about what are the points of contention. Blackbird versus Ransom King is easy. Blackbird wants some things to change about the way that the world is run. Ransom King is in charge of the way that things are run now. That does not necessarily mean that they do not agree on things or that one of them is corrupt and one of them isn't, especially since I am leaning towards Ransom King being kind of at the mercy of some of the higher-ups going on there, which is an interesting direction to take with this. Let me sit with that and we'll get into more detail when it becomes relevant and see what we think about that particular idea. We also said the Ransom King may not be a king, but there is definitely this, perhaps even this idea that if the king is being ransomed and held at the mercy of their advisors, whatever, there is this idea that the power does not all rest with them, perhaps in a way that they haven't quite realized yet. But let's get back to that in a second. Let me actually make a note of that. So this brings into question power dynamics under Ransom King and their subjects, perhaps, is the best way to put that for now. So I'm also seeing that this is implying houses, guilds, families that Ransom King is beholden to. Essentially, we are looking at a situation of regulatory capture on steroids. That one's easy. Or at least the ideological conflict here is easy. So we've got a few directions we can take this, and let me jot those down now because this is now where I'm going. So we can have, let's make this no longer Christmas colours. I don't like that this is Christmas colours. Blue. Done. Options for this. Option 1 is that RK is, what's the word that I'm thinking of? Not ignorant necessarily, but is unaware of the realities of their power base and Blackbird is resentful of this, as is right and proper, really. So that's option 1. Option 2 is Ransom King and Blackbird, or Ransom King is actually ideologically opposed to Blackbird. There is actually something that is coming between them from an ideological standpoint. I like this because it gives the Ransom King more agency in this situation, right? Now, while I was writing that, my brain has rushed ahead 3 steps, so let me backtrack and explain what my brain has just done, because I think I've actually solved this problem now. The other relationship that popped into my head very quickly is RK was a revolutionary also. The kingship is recent, and Blackbird is an old... What do you call someone that was a member of the same movement as you, though not necessarily ideologically aligned? An old ally, an old co-conspirator. Let's go with an old ally. Now, what this then brings us into is, what if we've got a French Revolution situation? Which I like. And what I mean by a French Revolution situation, if you are aware of the utterly messy and catastrophic history of that particular portion of history, is that there are a lot of problems. A revolution happened, and then over the next however long it was, I don't recall, it was quite a long time though, revolutions just kept happening because people had done them once. They sort of knew how to do them, and all of the structures that came in after the revolution were variously weakened by infighting, by the fact that not all of the problems were solved, by the fact that you had a bunch of people who had agreed to ally in order to take power, and now that they had it, they had to reconcile these fundamental differences in how they wanted to do things. What I mean by this is that we may have a situation where the ransomed king is only a very recent ascended to the throne, perhaps not even the one who was supposed to be there in the first place. Which I like because it does give them a sense of responsibility. This does let me give a reason why someone who is unsure whether or not they agree with the Blackbird and how much is in power, does have a shaky power base, and is in the position that they are in, without making me have to do what was gonna happen up here in this option here, which is this kind of like, oh, poor put upon royalty who know not what they have gotten themselves into, which is weird, and fantasy does it way too much and I don't like it. But put them in a French Revolution situation and suddenly it makes sense. Suddenly there are reasons why all of these circumstances are conspiring against the person who's currently in power in a way that they both are responsible for and are not responsible for. So this then goes back and answers. This brings in, sorry, skipping ahead of myself again, because the other part of this that I then got to was, this brings in the Queen of the Undead as someone who has absolute and enduring power versus the Ransom King who has this new and shaky power base. And now we're starting to get somewhere. Nice. Okay. So now we've got the Ransom King connected up a little bit. The other thing that I then said but then backed off to explain this bit, and now I can finally get to the end of this train of thought that I started and I've had to backtrack on so many times, is that we were talking about French Revolution, we were talking about the shaky power base, we were talking about how Blackbird comes into that, we were talking about the you know what? Having to write down that Queen of the Undead thing means it has gone completely out of my head. I will put it in the snark notes when I go back and rewatch this and I figure out what I was saying. So let me now write down some things that we concretely know. That's it. I was going to get back to this. We've now answered that question, right? Of the consistent unrest thing, right? So this means that I think if we have other players, and yes, I know that a huge part of the reason why the French Revolution kept going back and forth was because there was a whole lot of stuff with a, who was the war with? They were at war with somebody at the same time, and how well or badly they were going in the war was a massive contributor to how much everybody at home was accusing everybody else of treason and all of that sort of thing. And the fact that the war turned tides was really instrumental in bringing a few people to power and backing them away from it. However, I don't need to make this an exact replica of the French Revolution. I probably won't be including that because that sounds like something I don't have enough word count for. The reason I want to bring it up is because I want to acknowledge that that was part of the situation in the context that I'm drawing from this. That was a huge thing. And I'm going to need to adjust the way that I present this conflict so that it still makes sense in absence of an external conflict. I want to make a note here as well. Let me see if I put this, maybe I put this in a different column. What I'm trying to do right now is bookmark a couple of things in my brain that I will come back to. That's probably enough rambling on about the French Revolution, a historical event which is tangentially related to the current topic at best. So, I have some potential decisions about structure, because what I can start doing now is deciding on how this story looks when it's pieced together, because this is chaotic, shall we say. I'm going to call this delivery rather than structure. Because the Queen of the Undead is much more rigid, I don't know if I want chaos through the whole thing. So I can pull out chaos in the story delivery as it pertains to the Ransomed King, but leave Queen of the Undead sections quite structured and regimented and things like that, and use that to bring in the differences between the two of them. What is also coming out of this, by the way, which I will write down, and I will write down in this color because this color is good. Note, and that's coming through for me now in setting up these oppositions, is that her power is very solidified. Things are very orderly in the way that she does things. She has a real different sense about her that I want to get into, but I don't have time right now. So where this kind of gets me then with world building is, so for example, when I'm asking what does the Ransomed King's country look like? What does this rulership look like? What does this way of having and managing power look like? I can answer that question very simply by deciding, oh, it's a dictatorship, it's a kingdom, it's a monarchy with a guild system, it's whatever it happens to be. But the way that I've chosen to go about answering these questions is not by saying I need a concrete answer to this factual question, but it's coming at it obliquely and going, what is the question actually going to inform in the story? And what factual answer to this question gives me the most interesting result for the story? The answer of what system does the Ransomed King work under doesn't actually come from me answering this is the political system. Although when you get to the end of this process, the answer to that question is a political system. The answer is, it's the thing that lets me give the Ransomed King and the Blackbird the most interesting and complicated relationship, where I maintain a few core traits without pushing me into corners I don't want to be in. Let me do this. And last thing before I let you get back to your normal lives after having taken so much of your time, which you have very generously given me, thank you very much, but let's have a talk about this stream. I am going to stream on a Sunday, and I'm going to start pretty early in the morning for Australians, by which I mean I'm going to start at like normal adult time, as opposed to the angsty teenager time at which I usually get out of bed on that Sunday. I will be streaming for a pretty significant portion of time, so don't worry that you've missed it if you're a little bit late, basically. So all of the details will be in the description box. I will also put them all out on social media, on the Discord if you join the Discord, and that is what is happening with the stream. So I will see you here, not this Sunday coming when this video has been released, but the Sunday after. But that all out of the way, that's all of the housekeeping done. Thank you so much for coming to another one of these videos. I am thoroughly enjoying making them. I hope you are thoroughly enjoying watching them. I am also enjoying reading the comments. We've had a few comments so far and they've been an absolute delight. Thank you, everybody. So let us adjourn until the stream. I will see hopefully everybody there. So whatever time of day it is for you, I hope you are having a good one. And thanks again, and I will see you in the next thing.